Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're on to week number 7. We're going to talk about access control design. In last week's unit, we talked about access control systems and how they work. You did an assignment on lock placements for our warehouse, our semester-long project. And now we're going to go over the access control design, where you might put these things. What's the best use for these devices that you know have a history, run on electronics, talk to panels, talk to hosts, all that good stuff. So we're going to go over some of the basics of that. We're going to talk about design, but we're also going to talk about locks. So we're going to review the locks. I've had a chance to look at everybody's. You guys really took to that well. And you know, as I said in the write-up for this week, you may have noticed that no two lock designs looked exactly the same. And that's okay, because you're using predictive modeling, which we talked about very early on, to determine what the use of a room might be. So if I just say put a lock on a room and give you a blank room on a blank sheet of paper, somebody may put, gosh, you may put a card reader on there. You may put a storeroom lock, a passage set, a privacy set, classroom security lock, all those ones that we studied, because you determined what that room was going to be used for. We have some basic names on rooms in our design, but a conference room could be just a conference room. It could also be a place where we do projects with private information that we want to lock up. It could also be the safe room. In the event that there is a workplace violence incident, you need to put people into a safe area. So however you determine that room would be your logic for the type of lock you put on there. So I don't expect them all to be the same, but make no mistake, when you go into those discussions and you hear what other people say about the room, use that as your cues to see if what you put on the room actually makes sense. They may have said, well, I used a different room for the safe room because I thought it was easier to get to. Or someone may have noticed on that design drawing, the conference room appears to have windows. On the drawing, instead of the solid line, there's a set of two thin lines where it breaks from the hallway. Well, that's a window. Not a great safe room unless you're going to harden the glass, and even then, people can see in and see how many people are inside and make a concerted effort to try to get in. So listen to what others say and what their logic was, and see if maybe you made a mistake, which is great, right? What did we say in the beginning? You know, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. That's what this course is all about. So review your locks and see if you really want to stick with that, because you can change them on every drawing. You're going to be submitting overlays. So you're going to use your drawing with the locks. You're going to put your access control system right on it. You can go in and erase the locks and change them out anytime you want. We're going to go over the highlights of the access control features one more time. You can make any changes you want to the lock scheme, and then you're going to add access control features to your design this week. Okay, so what do we have here? If this looks new to you, if you've not seen this, probably time to close up your laptop and regroup, because this is the design drawings that we've been started with. This is our Butler County warehouse that we are going to design security into, and then change the function a little bit. But if you have not seen this before, time to regroup. And if you have not read the vulnerability assessment, the risk assessment, the really basic one that I put out there, please go do that so you understand what the building's being used for. So here we have our warehouse with my first crack at a design for our locking system. So one of the first things I did was I determined that the outside doors, down here, the entry, will be the main entry. This is off the loading docks. There's a couple reasons I determined that. First off, it is one of the two places you can get in and out of the building. But mainly because there'll be a lot of activity through this door to go and talk to drivers as they pull up to load and unload. And so having one entrance rather than two is always better from a security perspective, right? You want to make sure that if you filter people through the least number of entries possible, then you will have the better chance to screen each person. If they're coming in through 3, 4, 5 doors, you got 3 or 4, 5 doors to control. In this case, you had the option for 2, and we took 1. So I put card readers on here, and there's a reason for that, and we'll go over that a little bit. But I did not put a regular lock on there, but I had to put a lock of some kind, right? You can't just have the readers because they don't secure the door. So I put a mag lock, and I made this an emergency exit. So that's how I handled the outside doors. Your mileage may vary. You may have different reasons for what you did, and you may have had your main entrance over here. You just needed to tell me why you did that when we talk about your design so that I can understand why you chose that, and perhaps yours is better than mine. But you need to have the logic. And my logic here was, this is the place where you can go out and talk to drivers. It is accessible to everyone. And when we put cameras on the building, I'll be able to see what's going on at that door. So if we come into the building, we come in here and we make a turn and we go up the stairs to the mezzanine where all of our office areas are. I went down the hallway and started in the conference room, and I used an office lock on the conference room. I used an office lock because we can secure it if people are having a meeting with important documents or important things maybe on a whiteboard. Perhaps these windows are frosted, so you can't see in, but there could be important information. I wanted to be able to lock the door. Excuse me. I also didn't want people to hang out in here during off hours, potentially, because there's more activity here during the day, probably, like most businesses. But I didn't want people to hang out, so I wanted to be able to lock the door and have a limited number of keys of who gets in. Perhaps the foreman in each work group could carry a key as well as the people in these offices. Then I put a passage set on the break room. Now, some people put a classroom security lock here because they said we'll use this for a safe room because it has no windows to the outside, which is a pretty good plan, with the exception of if this is a 4-person table, there's not a lot of room. We figure a warehouse this size probably has 30 or 40 workers, anywhere from 10 to 15 per shift. And if that's the case, putting 10 people in here, even for a short period of time, is going to be problematic. I put a passage set. I thought it was good for people to be able to get in and out to the coffee maker, to the refrigerator, to the sink, whatever they needed, for personal comfort, and we shouldn't impede that. So I went with a passage set here. Again, if you had a different use for this room, you would have a different lock type. So I used an office lock because we may lock up some papers in here for short periods of time when there's meetings going on. And I didn't want people hanging out in here. And then the passage set here so people could have free access to the break room. I wasn't all that concerned about them stealing my lunch. And most of you have seen me. I like to eat, but I'm willing to take that chance that my yogurt will be there at lunchtime. So then I went up the hallway, and we have our 2 executive offices. Now, we call them executive offices. They technically, in a warehouse, it's likely to be a manager, a warehouse director, perhaps. They wouldn't necessarily be executives in the sense of people you would see on the financial news and in the New York Times. So we don't necessarily need to have a bodyguard area, right? But you could use a classroom security lock or an office lock. They definitely want to lock their stuff up at night. And they may want to use a classroom security lock because they would be targets if there was a workplace violence incident, more so likely than the folks down here on the operating floor. So you could use either one of those. Now, in here in the file room, and in our description of the file room, we're going to keep samples of product. And in some cases, the samples are going to be product which is regulated, right? Because we're going to convert our candy and gum warehouse to a recreational marijuana warehouse at some point when legislation changes. And so that's why this building was designed. It is designed for a current product and then a future product. And if we're going to keep samples in here, we need to be able to lock them up, have control, and have a history of who went in and out. The way to do that is with a card reader, right? The card reader gets that history. Remember, we studied that last week. And then I put a electric strike on the door. I didn't think a mag lock was the way to go. I liked the strike. And then I put a Rex device on the inside, right, to activate the door so you could get out without turning an alarm on and off. So that's the scheme I used in here. Again, you could use reader and reader on the inside, both directions. I didn't really need to know. I assumed that if someone went in, that they went out. And we'll have another way to monitor that from in the room when we get to the video portion of our project. But remember, you have to have a Rex device. You have to be able to get people out once they get in and disable the lock. That's the Rex device. People get hung up on Rex devices. If you have a reader on both sides, the reader acts like the Rex. It opens the door. You run the card on the reader, right? The reader sends it to the panel. The panel, which is getting information from our host, says you can open the door, and it opens the door. Remember this from last week, right? So you either need to have reader and reader or reader and Rex, and then some sort of a locking device, either an electric strike or a mag lock if you're using readers. I determined to use an electric strike here. I just think it's the right environment for it. And again, on these, office locks are fine, or classroom security locks are fine. I don't like classroom locks per se in a business setting because you still have to go outside the room. So let's just say someone came in and there was a workplace violence incident, an active shooter. The person in this room wants to secure themselves in and be safe. They would have to go outside to lock the door with their key and then close it behind them when they went back in, and under their desk is the preferred place to be, right? If you're going to shelter in place where you can't be seen. We don't want them to have to walk out, so I use the classroom security lock rather than the standard classroom lock here. Or simply an office lock if you want to do that, because it can be locked from the inside. It's just that with an office lock, you could leave it unlocked. When you turn your thumb turn on the back, if you're in and out all day and you turn the thumb turn, you forget to turn it when you leave and you don't rattle the handle, you can leave your office unlocked. So I prefer the CSL in these two rooms. But again, office lock is not wrong. Okay, so now you're scratching your head and you're saying, okay, so you're telling us that anything goes. Well, that's not necessarily true. While our designs may vary, there are certain decision points that tell us what type of lock or what type of device to put on a room. So think about this. Do you need a record of who went in the room? And if you needed a record of who went in and out, or just in, could a key give you that? It really can't. You don't know whether I used my key at 2 a.m. on a Saturday to go in and out of a room. You know I have access to the room because you issued me a key, but you don't know when I used it. So if you need a record of who went in, or if you need a record of who went out, then a key wouldn't necessarily be the right device. You would need a card reader or a cipher lock. We determined the electronic cipher locks can also give us a record, but you need some sort of an electronic device to keep a record, to keep a history of who went in and out. You need to determine if the room needs to be locked at all. In the case of the break room, my determination was it did not need to be locked. I was not using it for a safe room. There was nothing stored in there that was vulnerable from a monetary standpoint. My risk assessment was that the room should be left unlocked, and I put a passage set on there simply to cover the hole in the door. So to determine whether the room needs to be locked at all, does it require constant locking? If it needs to be locked, can you unlock it during the day and lock it down at night? Much like some of the classrooms, right? Or does it need to be locked all the time? The janitorial closets, as you walk around the university, have storeroom locks on them. It's so people don't go in and take janitorial supplies. And the housekeepers around the university, who work very hard, by the way, when you see one in the hallway, please say hello to them. They work very hard, especially in this time of COVID. But can you imagine if they had a bottle of window cleaner in there and they needed to clean something and they went back in and it was gone because somebody in a classroom decided they needed to clean their glasses, grabbed the window cleaner bottle, took it down to the classroom, cleaned their glasses, left the bottle in there, and now the housekeeper has no window cleaner, has to go over to another building or to another floor to get another bottle. It would be really, really tough on them to do that. It would be very inefficient. So even the janitorial closets need to be locked all the time. So you look at the function of the room. Certainly if something has a lot of audiovisual equipment, stuff that can be sold on the black market, you certainly want it to be locked all the time. And if that's the case, then you certainly can't use a passage set. And a privacy set would probably not be the best option because people can turn that thumb screw. Same thing with an office lock. You would probably want to use a storeroom lock. Does the room act as an office and a safe room or as something else? So the conference room may be a project room. When we expand our warehouse and we go from gums and mints and candies to recreational marijuana, which is what we determined was going to be potentially stored in there, we may need a room to stage product when it comes in. We don't have a testing lab in here. We don't have a place to take samples that you have to retain potentially of the product for quality purposes. We may need to use the conference room for a while. So we probably want to put a lock on it. And it may be used as a sampling room. It could also be used as a safe room. If it is, then a classroom security lock would be your best bet. If it's being used as a sampling room, perhaps a storeroom lock. If it's simply an open conference room, again, passage set or an office lock. And the other thing is, think about the number of users. Big decision point here. You may have the right type of lock, but if you've got 40 or 50 people that need to get in and out of a room, a hard key lock is probably not the best option because someone has to keep track of who has all those keys. Keys get handed to one person to another. I can't tell you how many times in my career that when I had key control as part of my job early in my career, someone would leave the company and they would bring me a bag of keys. I mean, sometimes there were dozens in there, and I would say, "Where did you get these?" "Oh, I collected from people when they left, and we changed jobs, and I have those now." So keys are hard to recover and keep track of. So unless you have a very limited number of people, I would really opt to say 5 to 7. Although, again, different environments may be a little different, but 5 to 7 people with a key to something. Beyond that, you probably want to go to something electronic or understand whether the room needs to be locked at all. So these are the decision points you use. And as long as you're using decision points that are valid and you can answer these questions about why you put a certain type of device or locking device, access control device, either electronic or hard key, as long as you're going through these decision points to make them, you're really going to be able to defend your choice, even if it's different than everybody else. So let's apply these decision points to each one of the rooms that we potentially could lock interior to our warehouse, because there's only a few of them. So let's practice using them, and it's really pretty simple. The break room. Do you need a record of who went in and out of the break room? You do not. There's no reason for you to say, Now, I did have one student who made a very valid point in saying they had a card reader on a break room where they worked because the manager wanted a history of how long people were spending on break. That's a valid reason to put a card reader on a break room. However, I would suggest politely that someone who manages people, it is much easier to simply get up at the end of break time and go and say, "Okay, guys, it's time to get back to work." Card readers tend to be expensive. They have some administrative costs to them. And frankly, it's a manager's job to make sure their people are able and willing and on time to get their jobs done. And so I guess I'm walking on eggshells a little bit. I don't want to say that person is a good or a bad manager, but I would suggest that you don't want to manage by device. When you manage people and you lead people, you actually go and talk to them. But does the break room need to be locked at all? My determination was no. The loss would only be to personal food items, coffee, kitchen supplies. Nothing of major value in our operation. Doesn't need constant locking if it doesn't need to be locked at all. Does it act as both an office and a safe room? You could say so, and if you do, your answer will be different. But my answer was no. And are keys going to be hard to recover? Absolutely. If you had to give a key to everybody who worked there, because everybody has access to the break room, if we had 40 people, you have 40 keys issued. And every time somebody leaves the company, you got to make sure you get that key back, or you have a key floating around somewhere that you don't know where it is, and thus your room is less secure each time you have a key that is not accounted for. So in my decision, this was the passage set. So same formula. The conference room. Do you need a record who went in? You really don't. And certainly if you don't need to know who went in, you don't need to know who came out. Some areas, I ask, do you need to know who went in and out? There are some areas where you may need to know when someone went in and when they came out to see if they had enough time for something, or if there's time limits in a room. I know in pharmaceuticals, there is only a certain amount of time you may spend in certain rooms for quality reasons. People who go in and do inspections of products can only spend an hour on a line inspecting a product before they must take a break and leave the room. And we use timers on an access control system to do that. But there are places where you want to know who went in and who went out. Maybe your perimeter of this building, and in fact, I designed that on mine. As you remember, there was 2 readers on that main entrance by the docks. I want to know when people come in, and I want to know when they went out in case something happens in the building. And also as a mustering issue. If there is a fire or emergency in the building, I will be able to go to my host, pull up an access control record, see who went in, and then if they went out, and I can account for my people that way. Does the conference room need to be locked? Maybe. I talked about using it for a sampling room or for important meetings. Maybe. Does it require constant locking? I would think not. A lot of times conference room doors are propped open when no one's in there, so you can see and you can have an impromptu meeting. Does it act as both an office and a safe room? Again, maybe. Some of you decided that was the case. But for me, probably no, because those windows may be uneasy, and the cost of the ballistic window film to make that into a real safe room is pretty prohibitive. That stuff is not cheap. So I said no. And are keys going to be hard to recover? Well, if you issue a limited number of keys, then no. So if you gave one to each supervisor and the two executives, as we were calling them in our scenario, and anytime somebody needed to get in, if the room was locked, they could go and unlock the room. I think you're fine there. That's a limited number of people, probably one per shift and then two others. There's 5. We're good. So I decided on an office lock set. Again, if you have different answers, your decision on your locking device may be different. Let's move on to the next office. So do I need a record of who went in and out of the executive offices? I really don't. As long as only people who are allowed to get in there can get in, I don't need to know when they went in and when they went out. I don't need to know what time the boss went in his office and what time he left. But does it need to be locked? Certainly at night. I would assume, and I think it's a safe assumption if you think about it, that those are the managers of this facility. They likely have personnel records of some kind in their office. They may have plans for downsizing. They may have plans for bonuses for everyone that they don't want to release just yet. They definitely need to be locked. So there's a yes. We know that we're going to have a lock. Does it require constant locking? Seldom. I mean, most of the time, people like to have their door open while they're working. The executive may walk from one office down to his partner's office next door to collaborate on something, and they wouldn't lock the door to go next door. So it doesn't require constant locking. Does it act as an office and a safe room? Yeah, maybe. I think that I would probably put something on there to protect those executives because they are more likely targets statistically in a workplace violence incident. Supervisory and managerial employees tend to be more targeted, although oftentimes the workplace violence incident goes awry and others become, unfortunately, collateral damage in that. But statistically, when someone comes back into their workplace, they are looking for someone in particular. It is normally a person in a supervisory or managerial capacity. Therefore, the executives having their offices set up as a safe room as well isn't a bad idea. You're only going to issue a limited number of keys, probably to them and them only, right? They may carry the office key to the executive office next door for convenience sake in case, somebody forgets their keys. Mary is the top executive and Bob is the assistant, and Mary forgets her key. She can walk to Bob, hey, Bob, can you let me in? They may even be keyed alike, right, on a single key. But there'll be a limited number issued, so they're not going to be hard to recover if someone leaves. So that's why I went with either an office lock set, or if I'm going to use it as a safe room and I go to that step because I think that there's a potential for that, classroom security lock. I use the decision points to get to my answer. So now what I'd like you to do before you flip to the next slide is to think about, in fact, just when I'm done here, just shut it off for a second, shut off the video for a second, and think about the file room. Now, as you recall, we are going to put samples, retained samples, because we're distributing food and potentially a controlled substance from our warehouse. We will need to retain samples of the things we distribute, just in case something happens in the field, someone gets sick from the product. We'll be able to show that we have a retained sample, that when we got it, it was not adulterated in any way, it was properly stored. And each load we send out will retain some samples from. So think about that file room. Remember, we wanted to control, and we kind of needed to know, who had access to those things. So what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and shut off the video, look at this slide, while just pause it and look at this slide, and answer the questions for the file room. Do you need a record of who went in? Do you need a record of who went out? Does it need to be locked? Does it require constant locking? Could it be an office and a safe room? And will keys be hard to recover based on the number of people who may go in and out? And then make a decision as to what type of locking devices you want to put on there. Go ahead and put it on pause and then come back and hit forward. So if you've gone through your process, here's where I came in. And again, you can argue these answers, but this is where I see it. So do you need a record of who went in? The answer is yes. We want to know who went in that room, who accessed the samples. Do we need a record of who went out? I would venture to say, based on the size of that room, and I also have a little bit more knowledge on this than you for the future of this project, that is that, remember, we're going to do cameras, right? We're going to do video surveillance system for this building as well. And so if I know what time someone went in and I have video of the activity in the room, and I've warned them that video surveillance is there, we're not hiding cameras anywhere, then I can actually watch when they went out. I could actually put the camera on the outside in the executive office, watch them go in and out, and use a time date stamp on a camera. But you'll find out when we go over those are notoriously inaccurate, and putting a camera in an executive's office is probably something you're not going to get away with. They don't like to be watched while they work, and in order to get that door, you're going to have to be getting some of their activity too. So I said, yes, we want to record who went in. I'm going to handle when they went out or what they did while they were inside through different means. So I said, no, I don't need to know when they left. The room definitely needs to be locked. There are sensitive samples, and it requires constant locking, right? We want everybody that's going in that room to tell us they're going in and to be authorized to go in. It can't stand open. It can't be blocked open. Does it act as an office and a safe room? No, because there are so few people that have access to it, and it's harder to get to, and you have to go through an executive office to get there. It's one of the last places I want people running to try to get in, right? It's small. Let's say we have 20 people at one time working in that warehouse. There's a workplace violence incident, and everybody runs for the safe room. On an outside camera, they spot somebody coming with a gun, and everybody sounds the alarm, right? You have some sort of an announcement, and everybody runs to the safe room. You're going to get jammed up. Some people are going to get left outside. I didn't think that was an appropriate safe room, so the answer was no. Are the keys and codes going to be hard to recover? Well, there'd be a limited number of people going in, so I didn't see that as an issue. But the other things, that history was the big one. So an access control system that we studied last week, or an electronic cipher lock, which we studied the week before, both collect a history that I can go back and either with the access control system, I just need to go to my host, sit down at that laptop, PC, server, whatever, and ask when people went in and out, and it will print me a report. Or with a cipher lock, I can go back and I can attach a device to it, and I can look and see when people went in and out. It will download a report. That's what I used for the file room because I needed that history. That was my decision point. So when we use these decision points, it makes something like the main door, that dock door, that man door next to the dock overhead doors, as our main entrance, makes it real easy. You want a record of who went in and who went out of your main building on your perimeter. In this case, we need to know if something came up missing in the warehouse, I want to know who was there and when they left. Then I can go back in my camera system perhaps and rebuild the situation and look and see what may have happened. The building obviously has to be kept locked all the time. We have our product in there. We have our people in there, our most important resource. So we want to keep the building locked. And it has to be constantly locked. Does it act as a giant safe room? I guess you could say that, since people from the outside are going to have a hard time getting in. But realistically, it's not a safe room because you could have someone, in fact, workplace violence incidents normally are from somebody who knows the facility and in many cases has access to that perimeter anyway. So the whole building is not one. So it's not acting as a safe room. But would keys and codes be hard to recover if somebody left? Absolutely. You'd have to give everybody who worked there a key, or everyone who worked there a code. And every time somebody left, every time somebody went out on a long-term medical, anytime somebody even went on vacation, if you have a policy that says that people can't access the building during vacation, which some companies have, you would need to go and disable that cipher lock or collect their key. That would be almost a full-time job for somebody at a facility once you got over, say, 100 people, because there's constant movement. There's always someone who's coming and going. New people start. People retire. People leave for other jobs. Too hard to control that. That is definitely an access control system point, and that's what I put on the man door next to those overhead doors, which we're going to consider the main entrance to our warehouse from my purposes. You may have the other door that way, but either way, your main entrance is really going to be access control on this building for those reasons, and those decision points drove me to that conclusion. All of this based on the predictive modeling we talked about in week 1. You're going to think about things like key control. How many keys would you have to issue if you had a key on the door? Do you need a history? Do I want to know who went in and out of this room at any particular time? The more private an office is, the less likely you're going to have that, because there'll only be 1 or 2 people. Like an executive's office, they seldom have card readers on their door because they're the only ones who should go in and out, and they're the only ones who carry a key. So anytime there's entry, you know who went in because they have the key. Are there any other functions for the room? And then when we talk about access control, the big thing is expense. Is it practical? If you're going to run a card reader and you only have one person who gets into that office, is it practical? The cost to run a card reader in an industrial setting is anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 because there are certain codes you must adhere to. You have to run cabling. Still today, we don't use wireless card readers very much in industry because they tend to be vulnerable from a cybersecurity perspective. So they're hardwired systems. They've got to be maintained. You have to have a system administrator that makes sure that, when changes are made, they go to the host to make changes. The panels themselves are expensive for that one card reader. So expense is a big driver before you put access control in. But let's look at access control design and the cases where you would definitely use this. So when we're doing access control design, now we understand how these systems work, right? Because we studied that last week. We have to consider what the reader location is. Where are we going to put the card reader, right? First off, is it, are we deciding to use one instead of a lock? But then where we put it on the door. We have to think about panel counts. Every reader has to go back to a panel. And in our scenario, the design we're doing, we're using a very small 2-reader panel. So for every 2 readers, they wire back to one panel. And the panel is where the decision is made to let you in or not let you in, right? The panel location is hugely important because panels can get damaged. And when you damage a panel, your whole system goes down. We have to match the lock type with access control. You can't use certain lock types with access control. In fact, there are only 2, if you remember correctly, a maglock and an electric strike. And then we have to worry about where the host goes. That computer that controls the whole thing, where's it going to go? If that's vulnerable, then the whole system is vulnerable. And so you have to think about a location for the host, either on the premises, or it could be off premises anywhere in the world if it is a network system. So let's go over each one of those real quick. So reader locations. Do you need 1 reader or do you need 2? Do you need to know in and out history or you just need it in? So you have to determine first, do I need 1 or do I need 2? The second thing to think about is really a convenient place. And by convenient place, I mean you don't want to put a card reader on a wall and then have somebody run their card and then have to walk 5 feet, 6 feet to get to the door. You want to have it relatively close, but you also don't want to have it when the door opens that the reader goes behind it. That's called broken fingers. Okay, so from a safety perspective, you want to make sure you have good clearance, and you want to make sure you're not too far away so that they run their card on their ID card on that reader, they walk over to the door, and by the time they get there, it's timed out and the door's locked again. I don't know how many of you have automatic locks on your car, but if I'm going outside to get something out of my wife's vehicle, I always yell from the front porch, "Will you unlock your car?" And she says yes, and she hits a button on her app, and it unlocks the car. And it is inevitable. By the time I get to the handle, it relocks itself. I mean, at least I think that's what happened. She could be back on the app just pushing the button and watching me through the window and laughing, which is, likely as well. But think about the fact that these things do time out. You run your card and you only have a certain amount of time. You set those time zones, usually 5, 10, 15 seconds, right? But you don't want to have to walk so far that the thing times out and you have to go back and then rush to get it done again. So a convenient place where there's clearance, where nobody's going to get their fingers pinched. And then we have ADA requirements. Those of you who have taken my corporate security law course understand the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it basically requires that reader be accessible to people with physical challenges. So 3 feet off the ground is the general height requirement. And you must put it somewhere where it's not in an enclosure such that someone could not reach it. So sometimes, there's a little cubby in the hallway because there's a pillar somewhere. You want to put it on the back of the pillar so that nobody sees it for aesthetics reasons. You want to put it on the back of the pillar so it's closer. But if somebody can't get to it, and frankly, the easy thing to do in your mind is to put yourself in a wheelchair and say, could I operate like everybody else in this environment with this reader placed here? So ADA requirements, very important. You'll have an engineer when you install these things, and they are very good about understanding that, quite frankly. But if you have to specify it, make sure you put that it needs to be ADA compliant. So when you go through your drawing, you're going to put card readers where you think they belong. You already noticed that I have 2 of them on my main entrance, one in, one out, and I have 1 on the file room. You may end up with a different number. But remember, you can only connect a certain number of readers to a panel. They come in different sizes, but we're using a very basic 2-reader panel. So you could have 1 panel and hook 4 readers to it. You could hook up to 16 in certain panels. But in a common area like we have, a 2-reader panel is very common to use because you have shorter wire runs. You have more panels and shorter wire runs. So we're using a 2-reader panel. So for every 2 readers, you need to have 1 panel. That's the main thing you have to do. Count your readers. If you have an odd number, then you're going to have one that just has 1 reader on it, and you'll have expansion for later. Panel locations. So now you know that you have, let's say you have 4 card readers. You'll need 2 panels, right? Makes sense, 2 per. Now you're going to go and put those panels somewhere. Well, first off, they are big metal boxes. And a lot of times they have another metal box next to them that has a backup power battery in it. And so they're not real pretty. If you have a card reader on the main entrance to an office building, a very nice office building, you would not want to mount the panels in the lobby where people sit. Think about it like a breaker box on a wall. You really don't normally put those in your living room, right? You put them somewhere in a hallway, in a kitchen, under in a cabinet somewhere, in the basement normally of a house, so that they're not seen. So you think about if you can hide them to some extent. They can also be compromised. So if I get to the panel and get the door pried open, I have just basic knowledge of this stuff, guys, and I can jumper it and I can open any door in the place without you knowing it, right? Think about it. These are relays. These are just contacts. So you can hotwire the thing to open some doors. So you want them where they can't be really compromised if at all possible. In this case, you wouldn't want to put them outside, on the outside of the building, where somebody could pry it open and jumper the wires and get the door to unlock for them and come in and rob you blind in the middle of the night. You definitely want them on the inside, on the protected side of your building. You have to remember that they can be bumped. If you put them too low, and we're in a warehouse setting, there's going to be a lot of activity, people moving things, moving boxes, forklifts going. If you have them too low, then a forklift could run, just clip it, and take it right off the wall. Now none of your readers work, and you've got a big repair bill. But if you have to work on them, you don't want them too high either. I have seen people put them about 17 feet off the ground so that a forklift can't hit them. And then they're like any other electronic device. They need to be rebooted once in a while. Just like your cell phone, when it starts to get slow and kind of quirky, shut it off, turn it on again. You want to do that with a panel. You don't want to be 17 feet in the air, have to get someone up on a ladder, which is inherently dangerous, even for the safest people, or have to get a lift truck, which is proper for 17 feet in an industrial environment. You don't want to have to rent one of those just to reboot the thing. So you don't want it too high on the wall. And you have to remember, you want to keep your cable runs as short as possible. When you're using communications equipment of any kind, the longer the wire, the more degraded the signal. So if you have a reader on a wall and you have your panel 500, 600 feet away, it's going to inherently make it a little slower, just ever so slightly, when you run your card. It's going to take another second maybe to open that door. But if the reader's right next to the door, people will be hitting that badge reader with their card and pulling on the handle at the same time, and it's going to lock, and then it's going to open, and they'll yank on it twice. They will hurt their hand, or they will wear the lockdown. So you want cable runs and wire runs as short as possible between the reader and the panel for optimal communication. So what can we do about these things with panel location that can help you be more successful? Well, they're kind of ugly. Can you hide them? Well, a lot of people put them in a closet. That's permissible, usually with other electronic equipment, right? Sometimes you have an equipment room, a mechanical room where you have the elevator control perhaps, or something like that. You can put them in there with the fire system. You don't see those things normally hanging off the wall. They're normally away somewhere. But in our case, because we don't have a lot of space in there, most of the offices are taken up, how about under the stairwells? They can't get bumped, very hard to get bumped under a stairwell. Certainly a forklift isn't going to get under there. Nobody should be under there. And so they're sort of protected by the stairwell, and we do have stairwells. And so that may be a good place for you to think. That's a hint for you, but you can put them any place you think is the best place, and you may have another scheme. Can they be compromised? Can you protect them? We will study in 2 weeks about intrusion detection, and you can actually put intrusion detection, otherwise known as an alarm, on that panel box itself. It's a little plunger switch. So all it is when you close the door, it pushes a little plunger in, and that sets the alarm, and it says it's locked. And the minute somebody pries it open, or even opens it with a key, that plunger pops out, and it causes an alarm to go in to the host and tells the security person who's monitoring the system that someone just opened the panel. So they can be compromised, but there are ways, and we will study these in a couple of weeks, that you can protect them. So the panel location, in the closet under the stairwell, protected from a physical harm, and then from compromise where someone actually wants to get in there to try to do you harm, that plunger switch is the way to go. And again, you'll see those in a couple weeks. They could get bumped if they're too low, and you need a lift if they're too high. Picture height is best. And in fact, if you have the bottom of the panel at ADA height, now it is not impossible, because they're not all that tall, it's not impossible for someone in a wheelchair to potentially work on it, nor is it a strain for someone who's working on it to have to go down too low and they can't see where they're connecting things, because if you ever tried to work on something on the floor, it's not comfortable to do. So realistically, if you hang it at picture height, when you hang a picture on the wall, you want to look at the center of the picture with your eyes generally, right? And if you can do that, you're generally in pretty good shape. There is no ADA requirement for the height of a panel because it is not a general device, right? It's a restricted device, but picture height is always best. And then keep those cable runs as short as possible. And one of the other reasons, besides the degrading of the signal, is that in an environment like this warehouse, you're going to want to put it in conduit, plastic or metal pipe that runs with the wire inside of it to protect the wire from getting broken. Hanging conduit, putting conduit into a building is expensive. It is always disruptive because you have to have people, screwing stuff to the walls, and it is not cheap. It is rather expensive to install. If you can keep those runs short, you're better off both from that signal and from an expense standpoint. So hopefully that helps you with your panel locations, which you're going to plot on your drawings this week. So finally, we have to talk about the locking devices, because the card reader opens and closes a lock, right? It doesn't really open and close the door. It doesn't activate the door closer, even if you have an automatic door opener on it like you have at a supermarket. The door is locked. Something has to secure it. And when you're using access control, electronic access control, card readers in our case, you have either an electric strike, which we know from our previous lesson will essentially click the door frame and open up a spot on the door frame so that the door can swing free, or a magnetic lock, 1,200 pounds, 600 pounds of pull, a big magnet on a plate on the top of the door that when you run your card on the reader, signal goes to the panel says open the door. What it does is de-energizes that magnet and allows you to open the door. When the door closes, it re-energizes the magnet. If you have a card reader on a door, those are the only two choices you can have for locking devices in this class. There are a couple other ones out there which we can talk about later if we have time, but frankly, those are the two in 99.9% of applications with card readers. So if you have a card reader, your locking device is either going to be a mag lock, an M, or an electric strike, an E on your drawing. Now, when you use an electric strike or a mag lock, but normally electric strike is probably a better example, you can have a key on the door that actually allows the door to be opened without the card reader for an emergency situation. If that's the case, you would use a storeroom lock. I don't want you to put that on your drawings. I'm hoping I'm not confusing you, but you can have a key override that instead of the flap on the door frame unlocking, you actually turn the handle and the bolt retracts from turning the handle once you use the key, so that in an emergency, you can override that card reader and get into the room if indeed there was just the door would not unlock. And they stay always locked. So you highly control that key. But again, when you put a lock on in your actual practice, you have to have something on the handle. With the electric strike, I would recommend using a storeroom lock. Again, this is your design, and you design it your way. Don't just copy mine. I just showed you what I would do for locks. I'm not going to show you necessarily going forward what I would do for each step, but I wanted to go over it with you so that you understood it. But in our week 14 calls, and your teams were set, as you know, and you should have heard from your team leader about potential meeting times for week 13. In week 13, you will get your design drawings, each one of your individual ones that you've put all the overlays, all the different colors, all the different features onto your drawing, and you'll collectively decide what is best and make one drawing. And then in week 14, frankly, you meet with me and I try to blow holes in it and ask you why you did things in a certain way. And that's the idea. Because again, even with the teams, the drawings will look slightly different. And if your logic is slightly different as a team than the other team, no, we've decided we're going to use the conference room as a safe room, then your lock will be different. No, we decided that the main entrance is going to be on the right-hand side of the drawing, rather than it's going to be on the east rather than on the south side of that drawing, normal up being north. Well, then your drawing is going to look different than anybody else's. And what was your logic for that? Well, we just thought that was a better way to come in. You didn't get in the truck traffic, perhaps, right? Which is all valid. So it really is about how you see the building being used. You would use policy that we studied already to help people understand why they're using it in a certain way. You're predicting that use, and you have logical reasons. And I'm focused on how you defend your logic, not so much on what choices you made. If your logic is X and the design and the devices that you've chosen match X, then you're golden, even if I went Y with my direction. So you have questions about that, certainly connect with me, because some people get hung up on the fact that everybody else did it a different way. And mine looks different. Well, you made different predictive assumptions. And they may very well be good ones. So don't get hung up on that. Your design, your way. So the final thing you need to put on your drawing is the host location. Now remember, the host is that laptop or desktop computer normally that you're using to input all your data. When I give you an ID card, this is where I'm entering your name, your card number, and what doors you're allowed to get into with that card and what time of day you can use it. And that's what loads information to each of the panels, so that when the cards are run, they go to the panels and the panel makes a decision based on the information it gets from the host. The host can be on a network. And if it's on a network, it could be anywhere. So from my home right now, I can go in, and if I have an employee in China that is being terminated tomorrow, I can go in right now and turn their badge off. I can access the host from anywhere. It is absolutely, it's a web portal for me. So there are many systems, when you get into large systems, that have a web portal that anywhere in the world, people with proper permissions can go in and make changes to that system. If someone who normally doesn't work weekends is coming in over the weekend for a valid purpose for overtime, and their manager calls and says, I need to get Bill in. We had a problem with an order and he's coming in 2 hours. You from your home, if you have proper permissions on the system, could go in through the web portal and turn on Bill's badge for just that day for those few hours. Very, very common. For that reason, and for our projects, I would like you to just indicate that the host is there and just write the word host outside of the building. Put a square around it. I believe color is black we're using for host, but you have the color charts that go with each one. And just put it outside the building. Now, you may have a building somewhere where the host is inside. Perhaps one of those executive offices is really a supervisor, and he's also the person who administers the security system. He may have that host. It all wires back to a computer sitting on a credenza behind his desk. That's where he administers the security system. You could do that, especially in a small environment. But generally speaking, modern systems, they are networked, they're web portals, and they can be anywhere. So let's just on our drawing write the word host outside of the building so that you understand that there is such a thing, because you're going to need that when we get to the budget part, which is always fun. Because at some point, you got to pay for all the stuff we're putting on here, and I'm going to give you pricing. You're going to be surprised, and these are actual prices out of catalogs and off of integrators who install this stuff. And you're going to be surprised at how expensive it is, and you may have to make some modifications in your drawing simply because you can't afford all of the devices you've put on there. Don't get nervous about that. It's a lot of fun, and we do it together. But just understand that you have to account for that host because it is an expense that you'll have to have. So just put it outside, somewhere off property. When you write it outside of the building, I will assume it is either in the parking lot, or it is in Romania, or it is in London, or it is in New York, or it is somewhere else. So let's talk real briefly before we go about this week and the remaining weeks in front of us. So traditionally, we're at week 7. We'd be having a midterm exam coming up here a little bit before spring break. And I like to define traditions as peer pressure from dead people. In other words, there's nothing that says we have to do that. I need to understand how well you are adapting to the material and whether or not you are grasping it, and I have assessment tools to do that, right? Quizzes and discussions and drawings. I've got plenty of information. Okay? We have this constantly evolving semester-long project, and I think we're really to the point now where we're going to start getting momentum. Every week we're going to start adding stuff to these drawings. Every week it's going to get bigger and bigger to the point where you actually have a design drawing for a real building that you can relate to and understand how these pieces play together. I don't want to interrupt that with a midterm week. So we're going to keep moving. There's only this one assignment this week. That's your access control drawing. Okay. Let me fix that right now. I hate typos. Yeah, I hate them worse when I do them twice. So you have the access control drawing where you're going to put on card readers with an appropriate part of locking devices, which we know are only mag locks or electric strikes if you're using card readers, and panels, and you're going to put them on your drawing where they're best located. Card readers would be on the doors. Panels would be someplace where they're protected based on the lecture, right? And short wire runs. And then the only other thing that you can do, if you so choose, after this lecture and after reading everybody else's and seeing everybody else's drawings in the discussion last week, if you want to change some of your locks, go ahead and do that, right? That's why I got you all color pencils for the holiday, right? Because I wanted to make sure you had something that you could erase. That's why we don't do these things in ink or with highlighters, and generally don't type them. Go ahead and just write them out, right? One thing though, print out a couple copies of the drawing that's in D2L, the actual blank one that I showed earlier on. The first one I said, does this look familiar? Print out a couple of those. You don't need to redraw that drawing, by the way. Just put your markings right on one of those. And every couple of weeks, you may want to go redo it because it gets a little crinkled and it's hard to scan. But make any changes to the locks and place your access control equipment. You can make any changes you want as we go along until, in fact, even up until week 14, and when you have a meeting with me, and you may make changes during that meeting. That's how it works in industry. When you're doing one of these are living documents, which means that at any particular time when things change, when you're designing it, this is a new building being built. They may come back at the very last minute and say, we've decided we're only going to have one executive office. We're going to knock the wall out. We're going to cover that other door. You now have a change in your number of locks. And you may want to change that because now it's a bigger area into a safe room. These things change. These are living documents. They're living projects. You're working on an actual security project here. And so don't get hung up on, well, I did that and I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done it. I should have changed it to this. Just change it. And when you scan it in the next week, I will see the change. Plot your access control system on your drawings. Put the drawing into the discussion board. Okay? Just as you did with your lock drawings, do that with your access control. And it will have locks on it too. Remember, because you're doing it right on that same drawing. You just keep adding stuff. I want you to comment on 2 other designs that differ from yours. Look at the designs of other people. If they put things in a different place, ask them why and tell them why you decided to put yours where you did. And they should come back and tell you, well, I decided here because I thought this was better for this reason. And then you have the opportunity to say, okay, maybe I agree, maybe I disagree, maybe I'm sticking with what I had, maybe I'm going to make a change when I get my next drawing to submit. Maybe I'm going to move stuff. That's what the eraser's for. One thing, though, I want you to look every Sunday when we have these to make sure if you finish earlier in the week, that's fine. Remember, everybody has to turn in their drawings by Thursday, and comments are due on Sunday. But when you go in Thursday and you submit, and if you go Friday to do your comments and you comment on 2, please don't think you're completely done. Go back in on Sunday sometime and look to see if anybody asked you a question. It is common courtesy. We are learning from each other in this course, and I want you to go back in and answer questions that may have been posed directly to you. That's a common courtesy for your colleagues. Put your readers, panels, and the host, which you're going to put off-site, on the same drawing you have for the locks. Make any changes to the locks first and post it. Most common questions I get on this, there's one panel per 2 readers. If you have an odd number of readers, you still need a panel for that one, and you have an additional spot where if you ever put one on later, you can connect to it. But you can't have, if you have 3 readers, you'll need 2 panels. If you have 5, you'll need 3. You can't economize and try to sneak one on or just let it hang. They don't make a 1-reader panel, so you're going to have to buy the extra capacity, which when we get to budgeting, you'll see. No need to draw the wiring or the cables themselves. I know that you will take the most efficient route between a reader and a panel, and I'll be able to tell which ones are which, so you don't need to draw the wiring or the cables. That really just complicates the drawing. I'm available all week. Don't wait for office hours. I have office hours on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings to try to accommodate those of you who work on your stuff during those time frames, after hours and on weekends. But please don't wait. I probably heard from half the class last week via text or email, and I probably heard from another quarter of the class in person because I was on campus. So please don't wait. I want to make myself accessible to you. With that, have a great week. If you have questions, I'm here for you, and I will see you on campus.